Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Sheikh Abdurraheem Green's official YouTube channel. Today we are going to be speaking about decision fatigue. Now, before we get into the topic, why is it important to study decisions? What impact do decisions make in our everyday lives?
Well, I guess, everyone is making decisions all the time. And some of those decisions are, not very important decisions, but some of them are life changing decisions, not just for you, but for the people who you make those decisions for. I mean, all of us, in some degree or another, are in a position of leadership and responsibility. Almost everybody. Even children, to be honest, children or many children are in a position of leadership over their younger brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
The mother is in charge of the house and the family and the kids, let alone whatever other occupation she may have. She may be working these days, who knows? And similarly, men, they have responsibility over their families. And in addition to that, they may have all sorts of responsibilities, whether they are, managerial, just at work, whatever. I mean, the point being is that we all have these responsibilities, and these responsibilities inevitably involve making decisions.
Yeah.
But I guess the group of people to whom this is going to be really, really, really important, and who really need to sit up and pay attention and understand what's going on, is anybody involved in management, anybody involved, in anything more senior than that, really. Because then, your ability to make, the whole point of it is your ability to make decisions actually just deteriorates throughout the day. So that's what decision fatigue is basically about. That when you have to make a lot of decisions, see, decision making is it's intense. It's intensive on your brain. It's intensive on your mind, and your mind. At least this is one theory of mind. It has been challenged. It's not everyone agrees with it, but there is this idea that your mind is it's like a muscle, and just like any muscle, it will get tired if you exert it. If you really have to exert it, and you really have to strain that muscle, it will get tired. To the point of fatigue, it will just not be able to function, or barely able to function properly. And that's one of the things, like it's one of the 5 pillars of the pillar, not the 5, the 7 pillars. I have this course, the 7 pillars of willpower. And the first thing is to understand that willpower is limited. Your ability to control your temptations, your ability, I guess willpower even will involve, because making decisions is still about controlling your impulses. It's still about controlling your ego. It's still about controlling your desires. So anyway, let's go to the classic, case. It's a bit of a pun, that the classic case, which is discussed on this issue of decision fatigue, and it's actually about a court of Israeli judges who were examined. Their judgments were examined, and basically the long and the short of it is they found that people who went before these judges in the morning were more likely to get parole, and people who went in front of those judges in the evening were more likely to go back to prison. And they just found that this was, it was statistically very clear, and it was really, really independent of the merit of any particular case. It was just, I don't remember exactly the percentage, but it was large. So really the only common factor, and this was found over quite a long, lengthy period of time, with quite a few judges, and it was pretty consistent. So the only differentiating factor was that these people who went before the judges in the afternoon ended up going back to prison and not getting parole, whereas the ones who went in front of the judges were more likely to get parole. Why? Well, in the end, they figured it out, and they said, well, basically what happened was when people were presented in front of the judges in the morning, they looked at the cases carefully, they considered the situation carefully, and then they decided whether they would deserve parole or not based on the merits of the case. But by the time the afternoon came, the judges were tired. They were this need to make quite tough decisions about whether you're going to let this criminal back out into the public or not, and whether this person was, whether the public was ready to have this person back out amongst them. They just defaulted to what they considered in their mind was the easiest decision, and the easiest decision was just send them back to prison, right? So you have to remember, these are prisoners who have already committed a crime. They've been sentenced to their crime. Yeah, they're going to get whatever it is, say 5 years, right? And they're in front of the parole board to be let out early. So it's not like any big injustice is being done here, right? They got 5 years. That's what they're supposed to serve, right? So it's very easy in a judge's mind to say, you know what, best thing to do is just send this guy back to prison. That's just the safe option, right? So this is decision fatigue, right? So what happened was that they were just really exhausted from the effort of having to make these decisions. So they defaulted to what was really just the easiest thing for them to do. Now, you can imagine, however, where that is not just now a simple case of a prisoner who's got 5 years goes back to prison and doesn't get parole. Decision fatigue could really impact all sorts of things. It could impact whether you win or lose a battle. It could impact whether you press a button that's going to launch some missiles. It could be whether you sack a group of people or not. It could be whether you do the correct risk assessment as a management team that will either get the organization in trouble or not. Which got me thinking, Sabor, since we're live here, right, on, it's interesting. When is your senior management team meeting? Which is probably the single meeting in the week that involves making the most important decisions. Since you know this, I'm just wondering how good you are at acting on the information that you've got.
It's in the afternoon, which isn't.
Which I was thinking actually on the run up to this, and I'm just as guilty because I instituted it. But I've always said I would like to have it after Fajr. Yeah, that's what I've always said. The best time for me is to have it after Fajr.
Yeah.
Oh no, I've got to drop the kids off at school. Yeah. Oh no, I've got to this. Oh no, whatever. Right. This is the problem, of course. Right. So I'm just for everybody, right? When you need to make important decisions, you need to make sure you make those decisions when your mind is fresh, when you are the least fatigued. Do not make important decisions at the end of the day or at any time when you're really mentally tired and exhausted. That's really the important thing about decision fatigue.
I just wanted to add about not only the importance of this being a limited resource, but also when we think about productivity, Sheikh, as you know, there's this prevailing idea that a person who does very long hours and is tired and falling asleep at work, they're the hard worker.
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos was asked about something about his work, and he said something really funny. He said, I get my sleep in. He sleeps a good 7 hours, and a good working day, all I need to do is make 2 or 3 decisions, and I'm done. He's not for this.
Two or three good decisions, bro.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the key thing. And add to that, not to make 5 or 6 other bad decisions. Right. So the temptation is to just keep on making decisions, right? Yeah, you make 2 or 3 decisions, right? So now you've got to analyze it a little bit more carefully, right? Because the guy is smart enough to realize that I should only be making 2 or 3 decisions a day. I shouldn't be making any more decisions than that, right? He'll probably limit himself. It doesn't matter almost how important it is. What's the point in me making a super important decision when I'm tired? It could be a disaster that could ruin my company or whatever, I don't know, right? Okay, so yeah, there is absolutely something in just limiting yourself, right, to making 2 or 3 decisions a day, making sure they are good decisions, refusing to allow yourself to make, decisions at a time when you know that either those decisions will be neutral, they will have to be made again, or even worse, they would be really bad decisions. Now, of course, you can't always do that, right? I mean, sometimes it happens that you have to make a decision immediately. But even then, there's things that you need to take into account.
Mm.
Like if you are forced to make a decision and you really have no choice, then even then, there's things that you can do to mitigate, making bad decisions in terms of consultation, for example, in terms of doing something in order to just be able to refresh yourself mentally, right?
Yeah,
So as much as possible, you want to avoid making snap decisions, right? I mean, let's just say, for example, an emergency happens, right? It's late in the afternoon, you're so exhausted, something comes through. You got a few hours. Well, the crazy thing to do maybe you need to just go in a room, lie down, yeah, just close your eyes, chill, whatever, do whatever it takes to just totally clear your mind and get some rest, right?
mm,
And then, approach this decision as fresh as possible. So it's things like that, like,
yeah,
this whole thing where they say, just sleep on it. It's actually generally really good advice. If you
mm,
can just sleep on it, you should do that, right?
yeah,
Shouldn't allow people to force you into a corner or making decisions when you don't need to, and let alone making a bad decision. Could be disastrous.
yeah. And would you say that, you know, there's obviously the issue of making too many decisions, and sometimes the safe thing, as the judges do,
Yeah,
is simply not to make the decision. But we destroy our ability to focus and concentrate and have this limited, uh, you know, will, because of our zombie scrolling and all the other activities that we
yeah,
get involved in, which saps us. And so we think because we haven't decided on something, we haven't actually, we've got nothing to lose. When in fact, that itself is a decision. When you don't act, I think this needs to be highlighted, that sometimes people think, oh, I didn't take an action, therefore I didn't make a decision, but actually you did, because
yeah.
something's pressing and
Well,
you
yeah.
said,
I mean, it goes back to that old chestnut that we were talking about last week as well, that comes up again, and I'm sure we all deal with it: procrastination.
hmm,
Zombie scrolling can often be, it can be, it's just part of procrastination. It's part of you putting off, we talked about it last week anyway. It can become a very easy excuse in your own mind.
yeah,
Obviously, when you sit down with someone else and discuss it, you pretty much quickly, it's the emperor with no clothes scenario.
yeah,
Like, it doesn't take much for someone to call you out and say, bro, you're just wasting your time. You think think that's productive? No, it's not.
hmm,
But the point being is, we can trick ourselves to think we're being productive. We can trick ourselves to think that there is benefit in this zombie scrolling stuff. That, and maybe very occasionally there is. In 100 things we look, there may be something that is. Unfortunately, the problem is it soon gets lost in the next 99 things that follow it. And it very, very rarely translates itself into some tangible action. I think this is the other thing that's really, like, if you follow this whole COVID thing, what has happened with COVID? Now, there's a whole group of people who, at the beginning, they were being called conspiracy theorists. And the crazy thing is that, at least a good number of the things that they were saying just proved to be true, right? It's crazy, right? Yet no one seems to be able to have the focus, yeah, to pursue this thing properly and take it to its logical and rational conclusion, because there's just another crisis, another thing, and whatever. And no one seems to have that ability to focus and concentrate on anything for very long.
hmm,
And this whole thing of being permanently distracted. But back to your point, not making a decision is a decision. You're right. I mean, unless you're consciously saying, I'm not going to And I'm thinking more here about someone like you, Sabor, right? For example, right? As a person who is in a senior management position, and you're asked to make a very definitive decision. Should we fire this person? Should we shut down this team? Should we open this country? Should we spend this money here or there, right? So I'm thinking of something, for you to say, I'm going to think about that, I'm going to sleep on it, we'll decide tomorrow, right? Yeah, that itself is a decision. It's not, but I think that's very different from what you're saying, is that the decision to sort of leave it and do nothing. You're right in that sense, in the sense of, I'm just, well, in that sense as well, yes, you're right, that is the decision. But that's just that, so we're talking about something different now. We're talking about, something that may be just a byproduct of laziness, right? Of just not being organized, of wasting your time, of procrastinating, because sometimes you don't want to face the fact that doing that particular thing is going to involve a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. Or it's going to take you out of your comfort zone. So when I was developing my willpower course, there were things that I felt very comfortable doing. I felt very comfortable reading lots of books. I felt comfortable taking notes. I felt very comfortable summarizing those points. Yeah, I felt pretty comfortable putting my ideas down on paper. None of that was really difficult for me, right? The thing that was really challenging was actually then turning it into an actual script. Yeah. And then getting down and actually filming it, right? That was the thing, right? That was really, really difficult for me, right? And I still find myself with that same challenge. I don't find it difficult to generate ideas, right? I don't even find it difficult to note those ideas and come up with some sort of quite concrete formulation of the details of it. But when it comes down to that bit of I actually have to write it, and then I have to film it, let alone if you have to edit it, then then that's the stuff that is the genuinely really hard work. I mean, I have so much admiration. People don't realize that the huge amount of effort that it goes into create content. When people talk about, I want to become a YouTuber, right? Whatever the YouTube is, like, not you and me just chatting now, which is one thing, right? But even something like that, even something like this, is not quite as easy as people think it is. Right? It's still not as easy as you may think, but let alone when you're developing your own content, filming it, editing it, coming up with ideas, it's really, really, really hard work. It is not an easy life. Yeah. In fact, I don't think whatever money they get is minimal compared to the amount of effort a lot of these people put into developing their content. Right. So, I mean, and let alone from an Islamic point of view, all the different challenges, and, that's a whole different subject, which maybe would be a great, thing to discuss sometime. The fiqh of social media, the fiqh of content creation for Muslims. Recently we were, going back and forth discussing a particular controversial, well, it seemed to me controversial character, Muslim, whatever, what you call it, blogger, YouTube or whatever. I mean, it seemed to me the guy really needs to do some studying about what is appropriate and not appropriate in terms of what are you allowed to say and not allowed to say, or what is appropriate to say as a Muslim, so maybe we need to get that sort of stuff out there. But I mean, back to procrastination. That's what I mean, you're right. Procrastination itself is a decision. It's a decision not to, but it's very subtle. You see, like decisions, when we're talking about decision fatigue. So we're being a bit more precise, right? So the judges have to, they don't, they're going to make a decision one way or the other, right? Are we going to give this guy parole? Are we going to send him back to jail? Like, it's one of the two things, right? There is a decision involved, right? Whereas saying, okay, we'll review this case tomorrow, we'll have another look at it. Well, that's slightly different. You're not, okay, you are delaying it by a day, but you're still, still going to have to make the actual decision. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
One of the things I think which is important to highlight here is what is the actual consequence in one's life if they have a habit of being indecisive? What would you say?
well, I have to be honest, I would have to study it a lot more. It's not something that I've looked into a lot, and I would not necessarily like to say that it's good or bad, right? Because there is a whole way of thinking that procrastination is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, I do remember reading, some very counterintuitive stuff, things that are very, very counterintuitive about procrastination, right? And that you may think that people who procrastinate, that's a bad thing, but there's some counterintuitive studies and information that actually indicate something very, very different to that. But again, right now, I'd have to go back and sort of reread that and restudy it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, on a personal level, on a very personal level, when you want to get something done, you want to get something done, right? And you keep procrastinating. A lot of that is to do with, being uncertain about yourself,
Yeah.
being worried, being afraid, not wanting, it's just an avoidance strategy of your own mind. It could be a load of things. It could just be your natural laziness. It could be your uncertainty, your lack of confidence. Of course, there are various ways to tackle that. And as a Muslim, one of the ways you tackle it is, having tawakkul in Allah, and making dua to Allah, and then making istikhara. And then once you've made istikhara, being firm and being very committed to that decision that you've made.
Mm.
So this is one of the things that we are encouraged to do in Islam, to think about it, make your decision, make shura first, right? Ask Allah, seek the help of Allah, make your decision, and then stick with it, you know. Um, and it may not, it may not work out how you want it, but one of the important things is getting used to that process,
Yeah.
right? Getting used to, there's no fail-safe process. Now, it's very interesting about decisions. Yeah, good. This is very interesting. Let's give an example from the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One of the, I find this one of the most fascinating things that you can examine in terms of decision-making process, and that is the Battle of Uhud, right? So, prior to the Battle of Uhud, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, here's the thing, he made shura
Yeah.
with his companions. Now, the method of shura is quite interesting. That generally, when someone is going to be intimately involved in something, you want to consult those people, right?
Mm.
So when I say intimately involved, I mean, for example, a battle, right? In the battle, people are going to volunteer to fight, and that's as intimate as you can get. Your life is going to be put on the line. So generally, you want to consult those people
Yeah.
who are going to be sacrificing their lives as to what do they want to do. Now, you're not giving them a choice to fight or not. That they don't. No one had a choice about that, like, because they had to fight. But where do you want to fight? What's going to be, So this was the interesting thing. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, okay, well, how are we going to fight this battle? He's making shura. Now, many of the youngsters, they were saying, we want to go out and meet these people. We want to fight them in the battlefield, right? We never let them come to our town. We never let them come to our city, right? That's our custom. That's our habit. They were all full of, fighting talk, right? Now, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't want to do that. He wanted to turn Medina into sort of defensive thing and fight from within Medina. But that was what they had decided.
Yeah.
Now, even as far as I remember, the Prophet had a dream that
Yeah.
he would win, right, from within the city. Now, of course, that did happen, right, later in the Battle of the Confederates, in the Battle of the Ditch, the Battle of the Ditch, right? They won, they defeated the enemy. So his dream came true. But the Prophet said, okay, he went with the Shura, even though that was not his preference. He went with the Shura. right? And he made a decision, and he put on his armor, ready to fight. So after some time, when these guys had cooled, the excited, they'd cooled down, they said, we should have listened to the Prophet. We should have listened to him. We should have done what he wanted, right? That was the wrong thing. Please, they went back to the Prophet and they said, Ya Rasulullah, we should have listened to you. I'm sorry, we were just too whatever. Let's do what you want. The Prophet said, no. He said, that's it. Once a messenger of God has put on his armor, there's no way back. You have to go out and fight, right? Now, okay, that may be a particular thing to a prophet, but it just shows us as well. This is because the Prophet told us in other places, right, about the importance of sticking to a decision once it's been made, right? Once you've gone through the process, you make the decision, you stick with it, because the other alternative, even though you could argue that the Muslims lost the Battle of Uhud, right? You could argue that, right? It certainly wasn't a resounding victory, right? And yeah, they continued to defend Medina, but in terms of the actual battle, it didn't go that well for the Muslims. And a lot of senior companions were killed and so on and so forth. And the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was injured in that. But the point being is that what's the alternative? What's the alternative? Do you want to develop a habit of constantly changing your mind, of never being able to stick to any plan? That anytime something goes a little bit differently, or someone changes their mind, or enough people make enough noise, and what if it's not a sincere group of people? What if it's a bunch of hypocrites? What if it's a bunch of people who don't wish you well, right? And they make a big noise. No, we can't do this and we shouldn't do that. And you just listen, and you just get used to showing everybody that every time you make a decision, well, when enough people come and moan and groan, you change your mind and change your course, right? What sort of leader are you going to be? What sort of organization is that going to be? What sort of society is that going to be, right? The alternative is worse, right? Meaning that's not a good place to be. This is not a good way to run your life, or your society, your family's life, or your organizations, and that's why at the end of the day, having that respect for the emir and their decision is really important, whether it's in the family, whether it's in an organization, or whether it's in the nation and the society.
What's interesting about this is that there's nothing in the seerah that's going to be superfluous to human life, to human experience, to the way human beings live. And not only is it that the Prophet ﷺ was the Quran walking, the Battle of Uhud shows us that, when Allah says in the Quran, when you make a decision, put your trust in Allah, as in we can understand that whenever you make a decision, there's always that 1% of us that says, let's revise the decision, let's maybe try this. Okay. But as we know, anytime you take action, you are never going to get the result that you expected. Things are always going to be different. So natural tendency is, let's go back and change the plans. And the issue here is that this will happen ad infinitum, because there is no plan. And I remember speaking
There's no perfect plan.
There's no perfect plan. I remember speaking to a scholar about this, and he's really into management and these types of things. And he said one of the big problems Muslims have nowadays is that we have this issue that anytime things go wrong, there's chaos, there's unpredictability, we start to panic. But he says this is like, we shouldn't be doing that. It's very hard to, okay, I want to make this decision, things have gone slightly different, okay, I'm going to stick to my decision. You really have to train yourself to do that. And
you definitely do. And I think one of the things is also the Ummah needs to recognize, and we need to recognize, but the Ummah needs to recognize, is you never know where the benefit lies, right? When I say Uhud was a defeat, I say that with a big qualification, right? Militarily, in terms of a battle, you couldn't claim the Muslims won the battle. It doesn't mean that there were not huge benefits of what happened in Uhud. It doesn't mean that the Muslims did not learn a great lesson. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that there were not many benefits that were derived from it, right? I have to say, this is probably, I can't resist bringing football into it. But I have to say is that, talking about not panicking in the jaws of defeat, Morocco were really
Yes.
impressive.
Yes.
They did not. I was just literally waiting for them to dissolve. I'll be honest. Yeah. I'll be absolutely honest. Yeah. I was waiting for them to crumble, to France to get another 2 goals, right? I was literally just waiting for it. They did not.
No.
In
They
fact,
fought.
they played a heroic. It was heroic. I mean, France were clearly the better team. Yeah, there's no doubt. France defended brilliantly. They have some good strikers, and they just had that little edge. But oh my God, like it was heroic. Yeah, it was just joy. I mean, I'm not even into football. I don't even, never, ever watch football except when it's the World Cup. But that one point, they didn't give up. That was impressive because we have sort of got used to seeing Muslims do that. You
Yeah.
know, when things get tough, the tough, they say when the going gets tough, the tough get going. That's we haven't, because generally, by and large, almost the opposites happen, right?
Mm.
You know,
It made
we
us all proud. It was like fighting to the end.
yeah,
Literally,
yeah.
they were just like the
It
last
was,
10.
it was, it was truly impressive. And I think, you know what, I mean, we don't want to take football analogies too far and whatever, but, obviously it's just football. It's just a game. Well, it isn't just a game. Nothing. I don't think anything's just a game. Yeah, it's just not true. Sport is sport. Whatever you want to say, this whole World Cup has shown how intermixed and interwoven sport and politics is,
Yeah. And
right?
religion.
From the disgraceful reporting of the BBC, Gary Lineker's disgusting, tirade against Qatar, the complete failure to criticize any other state who's done horrific things. We'll see when it comes to America, whether they talk about all the human rights abuses that take place in America and the death penalty and well, a whole bunch of, black
Yeah.
people still getting shot and whatever in the street by police, whatever, right? I doubt they'll be talking about that stuff, right? But it just shows that this claim that politics and sport, don't have anything to do with each other, it's not true, right?
No.
It's very, very political, right? But yeah, I mean, that's a very important thing. And you don't want to fall. And I think this is another thing about the Battle of Uhud, right? Which is a really important historical event to study. The other great thing about it was that despite suffering some really horrific casualties and being pretty badly mauled in that battle, right? The next day, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had rallied the Muslim army, right, and went back out again to chase the Quraysh away. Now, the Quraysh were pretty happy, to just run back to Mecca. They, so from a strategic point of view, they stopped the Quraysh invading Medina, that's a good win, right? From the actual specifics of the battle, it was a bad mauling. But the great thing is, you see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam getting the Muslims, chasing the Quraysh. This is something that, number one, sends a signal. Yeah, we're not finished, to the Quraysh. Number two, boosts the morale of the Muslims again to show them that, no, we're ready to keep fighting, right? And that's a really, really difficult thing to do, right?
Yeah.
To rally everybody and just go out again for round two. And so that again shows, right, is that importance of, even when things don't work out the way you want, you got to pick yourself up,
Yeah.
right, and just try again.
And this
That
is the
old Robert the
attitude.
Bruce thing. If you don't
Yeah.
succeed at first, try again.
Absolutely. And this is the attitude of the believer, essentially.
Yeah.
What else is what's the point of having this great book with these affirmations, because the Quran has these affirmations,
Yeah.
these very positive affirmations. It's not just about memorizing them without actually deeply reflecting about them. And when the Prophet ﷺ speaks about planting the seed, even if the day of judgment, even if the hour begins. So, this is all a decision that you have to make about your identity. Am I a quitter? Am I somebody who, am I indecisive? Sometimes we have this. We label ourselves with certain things. You sometimes have to act and call yourself certain things. Like you have to say, no, I am a decisive person. There's one small thing I just wanted to say. I think you need to go now. Actually, no, we should end the stream because
go on. No, finish this. Fine.
Yeah,
You've got a few minutes.
Just one thing I was going to mention. When I asked you about procrastination, you said you can't say whether it's a good or a bad thing. I just wanted to say that I think we can categorically say it's a bad thing when someone procrastinates equally on deciding what shoes to buy and whether to hire a person. I've seen people with certain dispositions when it comes to procrastination, and they can't differentiate between things which are really not important, like really not important, and things which are really important, and they start giving everything equal amounts of time.
Yeah, that's a different problem, right? So that's a different issue to do with productivity, right? And that is a prioritization issue. That is an inability to prioritize what is important over what is less important. And that's a hugely important skill to develop as well, right? Just for every human being. If you want to get your life more productive, you've got to focus on the few things that really matter, right? It's not quite the same, right? And when I say, is procrastination, a bad thing, right? I'm just talking about it in a sort of general sense, is that like what is going on behind it psychologically, right? I have to look into it. Let's have another discussion about that, because I do remember reading something that was really counterintuitive, and that was really not, like I said, it's very counterintuitive. So why might procrastination actually be beneficial? What are the actual benefits of it, right? Is it all bad? But generally, no. I mean, look, we can all recognize that procrastination, right, definitely has negative effects. All I'm trying to say is it as absolutely bad as we might initially try to paint it as? That's what I'm saying, right? I'm not saying procrastination is good. I'm just saying it may not be quite as bad as we think it is, right? That's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to qualify it, right? And there may be even times when, procrastination is a good thing. You have to remember that, deep down, what's going on? It all goes down to some deep, sort of very basic. Thing is, when you break everything down, most things come back to some very basic instincts that we have, some basic drivers, right? It's just fear, right? Procrastination is fear. Well, like that initial fear may be something very simple. Do I want to jump from this branch to that branch, right? Now, if I know that branch is close by and that branch is thick, I'm not worried about it. I know I can do it, right? If that branch is another 3 yards away and that's particularly thin, I'm going to be thinking, am I going to make that? Even if I make it, will that branch hold me, right? That's what procrastination comes down to, right? That you are genuinely afraid because what? There is some type of injury that is going to take place. But of course, today, we're not dealing with jumping from, cliff to cliff, branch to branch. Am I going to take on this enemy or not? Whatever it may be, it's all to do with these egos, this self-image that we have of ourselves, which we think of as being, a threat to it as horrible for us as an actual threat to our life, right? So what is procrastination? It's our fear of failure. It's our fear that if I do commit myself to something, right, and I fail at it, how is that going to damage me? What is that going to damage? How is that going to damage my self-image, right? What is that? So, it does come from a place of this sort of primal instinctive fear that often is totally misplaced because of all these things that we've talked about a lot. So, the point being at the end of the day is that it's not always necessarily bad, right? Sometimes you do want to wait. Sometimes you do want to think about things a little bit more, right? So that's the issue that we need to investigate, I think.
Brilliant. We can do that next week, inshallah.
Oh gosh, I have to start doing some reading and studying.
Don't procrastinate on that.
Procrastinating about these. See, come come next week, it's going to be like, oh dear.
You can explain why you procrastinated this week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and what you went through. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Green. Please do subscribe to Sheikh Abdurraheem Green's official YouTube channel. We're going to be making regular videos on here, and tell your friends and family about it. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.